Hello and welcome back to another episode of Aleph Beta Quarantined. Rabbi Fohrman is back with us in the studio. Rabbi Fohrman, say hello.
Hey guys, how are you?
We've missed you, Rabbi Fohrman.
I've missed you too, Imu. It's been a while.
Yes, and no better a day to join us than today because we're recording our special Haggadah Prep episode.
Wow, 'tis the season, as they say. Couldn't think of a better way to spend Haggadah Prep than with you. I've also actually invited a special guest onto our show, Imu.
Another special guest. Who might that be?
Another special guest. My partner in crime with Haggadah Prep and with Haggadah leading, and that would be my wife, Rena, who's here with us in the studio as well. The studio, by the way, isn't really a studio. It's just the yellow room on the second floor of our house, Imu, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's doing a pretty good job as a studio, and here in it with me is my wife, Rena. Rena, say hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. It's great to have you. So, Rabbi Fohrman, I love that you brought your wife because it reminds us that, right, the Seder table is not a place for a rabbi's speeches and pontifications. It is a family endeavor. And so it's very cool that your partner in crime leads the Seder with you. I'm really curious to hear what the Seder table looks like at the Fohrman family.
Yeah, that's true. I'm curious also. We'll try to figure that out. Every year it's a little different.
It evolves. It evolves over the years.
It does evolve over the year, which really kind of gets to, I think, the first great piece of advice that we could possibly give, which is kind of what you and Rena are saying, which is it's not really the place for a rabbi to hold forth and pontificate. Everybody says, oh, I wonder what it would be like to be a Rabbi Fohrman Seder. And I guess in the back of people's mind, it's like videos on steroids. It's just like he stands up on the chair and pontificates for 5 hours about all these videos. And that ain't what it's like, right? It's much more of an evolving journey of discovery that is a family affair, right? A family adventure. And maybe we can talk about how to try to recreate that kind of energy somehow.
So I definitely want to talk about that. But before we even get there, I think there's an elephant in the room this year that I want us to address. And that is the difficult feeling that it might be to hold a Seder under the pall of COVID-19. For many of us, we're aware of a lot of the suffering that's going on. Some of us ourselves may be struggling. And there's also the fact that many families that are normally together or together under certain circumstances, they may be at a hotel or traveling to grandma and grandpa's, they can't do that this year. And I know a lot of people are going to look at the Haggadah for the pandemic COVID-19 implications. What say you, Rabbi Fohrman, about all of that?
Yeah, so pretty much I say you what you say you. You actually sent out an email to some of our Aleph Beta listeners a little while ago that I got a chance to read, which I thought was, Imu, one of the wisest things you've said all year. Imu doesn't say very many wise things, so maybe that's not a lot of praise. But nevertheless, I found it kind of wise.
A broken clock is right twice a day.
Exactly, the broken clock is right twice a day. And let me just break this into two, right? COVID-19 has impacted us in one of the cruelest ways, right? Which is that it isolates. Rena, you were talking to me last night about a law that Israel just passed. Israel passed a law that someone actually, God forbid, dying of COVID-19 doesn't need to die alone, right? That others can come and be with them, despite, the risk to society. But that is an overarching mandate, right? You don't die alone. Even in Hebrew, the word for burial is levaya, which is a very interesting word, right? Because it means actually accompaniment. You're making this journey and nobody wants to make that journey alone, right? And a burial is really about accompaniment, and there's something about being there in moments of crisis for our loved ones. And one of the cruelest things about this disease is the way that it can break up families. I know, Rena, you and I were in Israel and we were trying to decide whether to come home and how to come home. And at least for me, one of the things that was a kicker, one of the things that really felt like, we got to find a way to do this is when my daughter Shana was with my mom, who's a little bit more vulnerable, and they were together in the house. And then it sounded like Shana might have been exposed, and so she had to leave real fast, so my mom was alone and Shana was alone, and you saw how quickly this disease can just separate people, and it felt like you needed to just kind of create a strong family unit and do whatever you could to keep together and offer each other support. And so I'm glad, that we made that decision. But on some level, part of the things that challenges us around this time, around this Pesach holiday, which is so family oriented, is the notion of being alone. My mom is going to be alone for Seder, just her. And I imagine many of our listeners may well be in similar circumstances. Thank God my mom is healthy, and so far everything's going fine. We're very fortunate and thankful for that. And sometimes there'll be people who aren't so healthy that are having a Seder alone. So part of the question, I think, for us, Imu, is what does it look like to have a Seder alone? If we can figure out some tips, or Seder almost alone, right? It's very different from the way you and I normally experience Sedarim, and I think that's legitimate and we should talk about it. The other thing which you mentioned, and here's where Imu's wisdom came in that email, is that a lot of folks are probably trying to think about or feel that there's this need to somehow bring in COVID-19 to their Seder, somehow make that relevant, somehow try to figure out how the Seder is speaking to that. And if that floats your boat, that's fine. You can do that. I imagine that if you start this kind of family journey, that may come up naturally in the course of conversation. I wouldn't try too hard to make it come up. I don't remember the lines you said, but you kind of gave people permission to say, look, go on a family adventure, look at the text, try to understand how it is that it's speaking to you, what the text of God is actually saying, and don't worry too much about preconceived agendas. One of the things we talk about a lot, Imu, in Aleph Beta, is not starting with baggage, right? Not starting with some sort of assessment that text A needs to be addressing problem B, right? You just can't start that way because it prejudices your view of the text. You kind of have to approach any text that you're studying kind of like with a meditative blank slate in order to effectively be able to understand that. And I think that's certainly true in this case also. And I think that if we do approach it with a blank slate and have a free-flowing discussion about what the text means on its own terms, once we begin to come to some understandings of that, it will be natural to be able to relate those more powerfully to the circumstances we are, or it won't. And that's okay too. But the night is about looking at Yetziat Mitzrayim kind of on its own terms. And I think it was beautiful. I don't remember the lines you had, but maybe you can speak to some of the things you said in that letter.
I don't remember the lines either. I wrote it a few weeks ago. But yeah, that wisdom came from you. That's something you taught me. You can't go into a particular story with an outcome in mind. And it is meditative. As you just said, I like that you called it meditative, because meditation is very much about not producing a particular outcome. It's about being present. It's about treating the text. It's like your friend, and you're trying to hear its messages. It's talking to you. You never sit down to coffee with your friend with a particular agenda, right? That's very annoying. You want to hear them. You want to hear what they have to tell you. And I think one of the things I said in that letter is that I have no doubt that on a deep level, if you are vulnerable, you read the text on its own terms, it will say something to you about how you're feeling today, right? Whether it's something as specific as, and here is what Hashem wants you to know about the coronavirus, I don't know. But if it might be something on a deeper level, right? The Pesach experience is very much about the role of the chosen people in the larger society, in the larger world. It's very much about this one time in history where God breaks the rules of nature and chooses to show up and to say that he's here for us. And there's tremendous compassion and empathy in that story. So there's a lot to take out of it on a grander level. You just can't go looking for it, or else it feels kind of cheesy and forced. One of the things I said was that this is a holiday that has been celebrated for thousands of years through many, many tragedies and trials. And it's a big, big event that deserves to be understood on its own terms. Will it have implications for us this year? It might. But I think we gotta treat it on its own terms.
Yeah, and I think that there's a little bit of humility also in that assessment of yours, that if you look through the grand scope of Jewish history, the truth is the last, 40 or so years have actually been the anomaly. They've been the exception. They've been the kind of easy cruising pretty much in Jewish life, at least here in the diaspora in North America, that makes the golden age of Spain look like child's play. in terms of the kind of wonderfulness there is, Talk to the people in the golden age of Spain about having Target open and Costco and going shopping on Central Avenue, eating in all the restaurants. It's easy street. And that ain't the way Jewish history has basically been for the last, 3,000 years. It's been punctuated by really tough times. And you and I, by the way, we did a video, which is actually currently featured on our site, How to Read the Haggadah, where we kind of made the argument that the Haggadah recognizes that truth, that people celebrate this in hard times, and recognizes that there's kind of a question behind all of that, which is, while enduring so much uncertainty and difficulty and scary times and horror, how is it that we can celebrate freedom? And that was actually on the mind of the authors of the Haggadah. If you're interested in this argument, go watch this video, How to Read the Haggadah. We argued that the essential introduction to Magid of Vihi Sha'amda was an attempt to deal with that question. So it's not like the authors of the Haggadah were blithe and were just, skating freely and couldn't dream of hardship when they talked about freedom. So I think that, we're in good company with many other generations who experienced some fear and uncertainty when they said these words.
Yeah. I'll also plug another one of your courses just to round out this discussion before we move on to the Haggadah itself, which is, a key differentiator, I think, this year to the other tragedies that Jews have befallen for many, many years, is that this isn't a uniquely Jewish tragedy, right? This isn't something that, one evil regime is singling out the Jews for. This is a global pandemic. And for me, it recalls one of my favorite videos you did and the last piece of the book that you wrote on Pesach, the Exodus you almost passed over, which describes a vision of Pesach that itself could have been universal. It could have been, and perhaps the best version of a Pesach that never happened, is a vision of divine revelation and celebration of ingratitude of the wonderful things that we have together with the Egyptians, together with the entire world, in fact. And this is something you described in a vision of the splitting of the sea that might have been. And it's a brilliant, brilliant course. And to me, at least helps me tap into the Pesach energies of universalism that I think I kind of feel in this time as we go through a universal tragedy or universal difficult time. If that doesn't mean anything to you guys, check out that video. That's a really, really great one to watch as well. It's the Exodus story that could have been.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so check that out. That's one of my favorites too. It actually comes from the end of the book, The Exodus You Almost Passed Over, which I wrote a couple years ago, which you may not have time to order and get from Amazon these days, but download it on Kindle.
Awesome. All right. Rabbi Fohrman, let's talk about how to run a Seder. Let's talk about a family Seder, and then maybe we'll talk about a Seder for people who are on their own or a smaller Seder. What tips and tricks do you guys have at the Fohrman residence?
All right, so I'm going to turn that over to my partner in crime over here. Sometimes I will admit I talk too much in these things, in these Sedarim, and just kind of pontificate and things and try to get everybody to listen, but those don't always work, right? What works better than that?
Well, in our heyday, when the kids were younger, we would spend about a month before Pesach actually letting the kids figure out what they wanted to learn about and prepare, and they would do it with visual representation and things along those lines. As the kids have gotten older, they're busier with school, so there is some of that still goes on, but they have been thinking about particular topics that they would present in some sort of way, whether it's with the same amount of visuals that they had when they were younger, probably not.
Actually, can you tell the story of where we first got the idea to do that? How did that work out?
So it was a Pesach program. It was a family from Israel that came in. They traveled with
and just
their
to set the scene,
posters.
This was about 15, 20 years ago or so, and we were back at the Miramonte. It was in Palm Springs.
I think it was Miramonte.
It was. It was a Pesach program. I think one of the first ones we were ever at. I was speaking, and we took a peek into this room, right?
So these people had posters that they brought with them from Israel. They came, I think, just right before Pesach every year to spend Pesach with their family, their grandparents, I guess. And they had posters of different topics that the kids had, their children had researched. And some of them talked about the timeline of Jewish history. One of them, I remember specifically, researched Moshe Rabbeinu's lifetime, all the way from the beginning and going all the way through. And we just kind of loved that idea, and we went with it, and we developed it in a way that worked for us and our families and our kids' interests and talents. And
we called these like Pesach projects. That's what we called these, right?
Yeah.
And the idea was you were going to try to come up with not just learning something new, but some sort of creative visual way to express it. So rather than just like this Dvar Torah at the Seder, you actually had something physical you could bring in and talk about and show, which was like kind of like
a show and tell.
Like a show and tell.
How did you get your kids to choose a particular Pesach project?
So it's a little bit of going with their interests and kind of like trying to tease that apart a little bit. What things were interesting or struck them, or, what things, when you think of the Seder, I remember one of our kids would get frustrated with not being able to understand how long the Seder is really going to go on and what really goes into it. And she actually developed a game, which was very cute. And it was kind of like one of these Monopoly board games where you would go from one piece to the next, and there'd be different transitions. So her transitions were really important.
So tell me, you as a parent heard that she was bored.
It was more than bored. We tried to get to the specific underlying reason that she was having difficulty. So we really, I guess, tuning into her particular foible, something that was really...
That it didn't make sense how it all fit together.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think it's not just her. I think that's an issue for a lot of kids and a lot of adults out there, which is, we made a joke about this where we talked about the mumble stop Seder. Right? you mumble and then you stop for a song and everyone mumbles.
Stop for a little Dvar Torah.
Right? And to me, the question is, how do you defeat the mumble stop Seder?
Yes.
She created this shoots and ladders kind of game, right? Where every step on the shoots and ladders was another paragraph or so of the Haggadah. And there was this, what's the best title for this paragraph? What's this essentially about? With an attempt and an accompanying chart that would connect it to the previous things so that there was a transition. Because one of the things that happens, of course, the Haggadah is rabbinic text. And anybody who studied Gemara knows that the issue is transitions, right? How does section 1 of text fit to section 2 of text? The transitions are implied, It's up to you to figure out, is that a but? Is that an and? Is that a therefore? Is that a through which? Right? And you got to kind of figure out how this builds. And that itself becomes an interesting kind of game. So we would put our Monopoly markers down on the game and kind of go through the game as we went through the Seder.
I love that. That's brilliant. So I'm hearing a few things. One is you involve your kids, but right, it's one thing to say, oh, I see someone who has these amazing poster boards. I wish my kids could do a Pesach project. But I'm hearing, and what's kind of brilliant from you is that you actually interviewed your kids and saw what interested them or even what didn't interest them. Like, so if you have a kid that is really interested in Moshe Rabbeinu and loves the character Moshe Rabbeinu, you tell them, okay, great, take this Chumash and go through and plot or Google and make a timeline of his life, and you're going to present it at the Seder, and it should be visual and beautiful. Great, you could send that kid on. But you took a kid who actually is kind of frustrated, and you said, well, what is it that's frustrating you? And then you said, okay, well, this kid just doesn't get, how long it's going to take, what's happening when, and you went in with that instinct and said, yeah, you know what? The Haggadah is not super easy to fully understand, but if you research it, and it sounds like you used the classic technique of yours, which is take it apart and put it back together again, right? Take the Haggadah apart, understand all of its individual elements, and put it back together again in the form of a game. Like, that's perfect for a kid. That's brilliant. That's really, really great.
Perfect for the family.
Yeah, no, it was great for the family because she was able to teach it in a way that helped the family follow. And by the way, I have to tell you, this Pesach project was formative in her life. It happened when she was 11. A decade later, she will still remember it, and she can actually go through the Seder, and she can lead a Seder because she understands how it all fits together, and she's got it like the back of her hand. It really made a huge impression on her, and it was wonderful.
That's amazing.
I mean, I remember, Rena, do you remember the Ramsey's son?
Yeah.
Right? Remember the
Ramsey's a newspaper, son? Right?
That's hilarious. A paper, Ramsey's son. Hilarious.
The Ramsey's son, right? Huge, right? Israel goes free today,
Right.
And then articles, right? And the virtue of that, it struck me, Rena, when I was thinking about it yesterday, is that what that allows you to do, aside from being fun and facetious and everything, is it allows you to do something which is a kind of bibliodrama kind of thing. It allows you to adopt a different perspective on the story, which is almost like a first person or second person perspective,
right,
which is different than the Torah's perspective. The Torah gives you an omniscient third person narrator's perspective and says, here's what happened, right? But there's another part of the story, which is what was it like to go through it? Write a journal entry or two for the daughter of Pharaoh from her diary, right? On the night after she saw that baby
right.
Moses.
Well, and substantiating with psukim. That was an important one. Guide them toward the psukim and Shemot.
Right. So draw on the text and transform those psukim into your first-person narrative of what it's like to have seen this baby, what it's like to be Pharaoh's daughter, what it's like to have dreams of raising him in the palace, but being unable to do that and she doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know this is Moshe Rabbeinu. She doesn't know that this is going to be the savior of the Jewish people. What is she thinking? What does that diary look like over the next years? What does the diary look like of the daughter of Pharaoh as the sea splits and the armies of Pharaoh are destroyed, right? How, there's all these wonderful narrative threads which can be explored with that kind of first person. And Pesach projects like a newspaper, right? Journal entries allow you to get into the guts of those first person narratives.
I love all of that. I love all of that because, again, this is very much you in your methodology, is that if you see the psukim as knowledge, as trying to tell you history, even if you see the Haggadah as just like, this is what you need to know, or this is what you need to have read by the end of the Seder, you're missing the majesty, you're missing the story, you're missing the emotions, you're missing the empathy. And this really allows you to develop empathy. These projects of like a diary or a newspaper try to force you to imagine what it must have been like. That's incredible. I'm a little jealous because I'm like, adults don't do that, right? Kids have these projects that force you to put yourself in those shoes.
Right.
And it reminds me that you only really get out of a Seder what you put into it. And if you kind of resist the call to infuse a little bit of drama and get into the story, then you're missing this huge dimension. It's really cool. Let me ask you guys this question, because this podcast is going to hit a day or two before Pesach. And so what do you say to the parent who can't necessarily put together an incredible Pesach project with their kid, a day or two before Pesach? How would you advise a parent to lead a Seder when they weren't necessarily able to put in a tremendous amount of effort in prep? What would you advise them to do at the Seder table?
I would still say that even if you can encourage your kid to look at the Haggadah ahead of time.
Let me be clear. When you say look at the Haggadah in advance, you mean open up a Haggadah with pre-populated Divrei Torah that they can copy into their notebook and read out loud at the table, right? That's what you mean.
That ain't the Fohrman way.
Okay, because let's be clear here.
You could do an English translation. There's definitely those that are going to need that. So I'm not, that would be completely appropriate, especially given the time frame. But going through, and kids always have a memory of the past years and what really spoke to them, what didn't speak to them, what they want to research or think about more. And that becomes like their little project. It doesn't have to be represented in any visual form if there isn't time for that. Although, like Rabbi Fohrman saying, even something like a journal entry, that's not a difficult thing to sit down and everybody write a journal entry from a perspective of a particular person in the Haggadah, or teasing apart another idea, or wondering how two things connect. And that would be their thing that they bring into it, because when they bring something into it, then it's obviously more engaging for them.
So in other words, you're suggesting that they could do a little piece of this, right? By the way, I think it's some structure maybe that you could give kids is say, look, instead of just opening a Haggadah without any guide to how to find meaning in it, one interesting guide would be almost the kind of guide that we gave to Abigail when she was doing that Pesach project, which is, as you read the Haggadah, ask two questions and two questions only.
Right.
The first question is, what is the main point of this paragraph? Can you summarize this paragraph in a sentence in your own words? What is it actually doing?
And you don't have to go through the whole Haggadah. It could be a particular
section.
And you could split that up over a few kids. There's more than one kid in the family.
Sure, you could have one kid do one section, one do the other. That can be done in a half an hour, in 45 minutes before the Seder. But a little bit of time invested before the Seder will make the Seder actually so much richer. But the second question, if the first question is, what is the best title for this paragraph? And these are the building blocks of what you call take it apart and put it back together again.
Right.
The child who takes a toy and takes apart the toy and puts it back together again. The second building block is, okay, if that's the title for this paragraph, how does it relate? What's the transition? How does it connect to the last thing and to the thing after that? Right? And if you could do that for just one link in the Seder, right? Then when you get up to that, it's Suri's chance, or Shandy's chance or Beryl's chance, right? To talk to everybody, to read that, and to proudly talk about, like, what's the main point of this, right? And you find surprising things. Things that you think are the main point are not really the main point if you allow the kids to read the actual text instead of the commentary. The commentary gets you in trouble, right? It's going to prejudice you. What you've got to do is just actually go back to the text meditatively with a clear mind and pretend you never heard before. Like Marina, I would say, take the text that is most well known in the entire Haggadah, Manishtana. Right? It's like everyone knows this. And you think it's child's play.
It's for children. Children say it.
Children say it. Manishtana, halayla zemikola. Everybody knows that. Nobody has to pay attention. But read Manishtana as if you've never read it before. Give a kid that challenge and then have them summarize what it is. It ain't what it appears to be. As a matter of fact, I would argue that every translation of Manishtana is wrong. Because how do they typically translate Manishtana? Why is this night different from all other nights, right? Where's the why? How is this night different from all other nights? If that's what it means, then how do you read the next sentence? Shebechol haleilot. All other nights we do X1. Are you answering the question now? You said, how is it different? And now I thought you're asking a question. It's not 4 questions, it's 4 answers. Like, what is really going on? And I think the actual way this is mistranslated is with the question mark at the end of the first line. There is no question mark after the first line. There's not a question, how is this night different? There's an exclamation mark after there. The kid is doing something much more visceral than asking some prefab question. A kid would never ask that question. A kid would never say, how is this night different? No kid is going to ask that question. A kid is going to watch what's going on saying, okay, first we're eating some green stuff and salt water. Okay. We're taking this matzah and we're breaking it. Okay. And now, after we made Kiddush, it's time for another cup of wine. And it's like, what the heck is going on? And at some point, the kid just can't take it anymore. And the kid is like, what is going on? Ma nishtana halayla zeh. And the exclamation mark is how different this night is than all other nights. And then the kid explains, Shebechol haleilot, and on all other nights, we do things this way, and you're doing things that way, and you're doing things that way. There's no question there. There's an exclamation of wonder. There's an observation, which is what we need to do in the Haggadah. Make observations. Realize the oddities. A kid is realizing the oddities, right? And once you realize that that's actually what's going on, so now it's not the 4 questions, right? It's the exclamation of wonder. That's a different title for that paragraph. So if you allow yourself to be surprised, right, and not cling to preconceived notions, kids can come up with some pretty amazing stuff.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I want to give people just a little bit of permission to dwell on that for a second. So what I've seen at Sedarim, or just in general, is you have a mom or a dad who has a really clear notion as to where they want this Seder to go. Idyllic vision of all the children springing up and participating in these wonderful ways. And often those kids can sense that and they're quiet, right? They just don't want to give mom or dad exactly what they want. So tell me, how would you react to a situation like that? How would you react to a kid who just doesn't want to participate?
I don't think a particular kid needs to act a certain way at the Seder. I think if it's a relaxed environment and they feel that their ideas are going to be taken seriously, then I think that will naturally emerge. I think that as soon as kids, of course, as soon as they feel the pressure that they need to perform, they are going to recoil. So I think that's part of the Pesach. To whatever extent kids can prepare, they bring something of their own to it. And then they're not shying away. They're looking to participate. They're looking to share their idea and hear other people's ideas.
And you know what? Different strokes for different folks. Even, you and I have different kids.
Right.
Some of them are more comfortable being out there and giving their ideas and engaging. And others are really just interested in listening and taking in more.
Even those, if they have something they're bringing to the table, it makes it a game changer.
Sure. It really goes back, I think, what Rena's saying, to preparation, which is if you've got some kids who are shy, who are nervous, and on the spot, one of the worst things you can do is ask them to stand up when they're unprepared and have to, in public, answer a question on the spot that they're not prepared to answer. They want the time to process. So for those kids in particular, even if you aren't going to have all of your kids prepare, if you can sit down with those kids, the ones who are more shy, and spend a half an hour with them sometime before the Seder, is invest that time. And boys and girls out there in podcast land, men and women, I would say this is every bit as important as scrubbing your stove. Scrub your stove a little less.
That's our next job.
Look for a little less chametz, be mevatalet, right? And choose to invest that time with that kid instead of turning over the couch cushions. Then there's a kind of preparation factor that will allow them to be there. And also, I think, Rena, one of the things is if you go around the room and you just let people read, and there's a relaxed atmosphere, it loosens up after a while. And people, when they read, will offer their own things to say, and even the shy ones can get into the act. Mm-hmm. I think the point is to relax, take a few deep breaths. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to work as a family.
I think that's incredible advice, and I really appreciate it. Rena, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks.
You guys are wonderful mechanchim, so that was awesome. I really loved that. All right, Rabbi Fohrman, let's talk about an adult Seder, or perhaps what do you do if you're at a Seder all by yourself, or a much smaller Seder than you thought?
Yeah, I think I have two pieces of advice. First of all, let's just start with what the Gemara and the Mishnah themselves say. The nature of a Seder is question and answer. It's Socratic by nature. The easiest way to do it is when others ask questions and you can respond. But if you're all alone, the Mishnah itself contemplates that possibility. And speaking of the 4 questions, it says you ask your own questions to yourself. And I think that's important. That even if you're all alone, don't get into a mumble stop Seder. It's not about reading the words. It's about engaging in a process of learning, and a process of learning is a process of questioning and answering. I would even go so far as to say that Manishtana is the model. Manishtana is not so much questions as it is observations. It's right. It's not so much some worked out question. It's just like, that's interesting. That's what you got to focus on, right? As you go through the Seder, what's gold for you is that's interesting, right? Isn't that remarkable? I never would have expected that. And then see where that goes. And if you can do that, I think it's a good start. One of the things I would kind of advise, I think, people who are alone, if you have your health and it's just you and you have the stamina and you can manage it, what I would suggest is possibly get on the phone or get on Zoom or get on some sort of video conferencing chat before the Seder. Try to make a date with somebody, 45 minutes to prepare, just you and them, to do some of the stuff which we were talking about. Even some of this basic 2 questions, right? What's the best title for this paragraph? How does it connect to the piece before? Just do some of that, right? By way of preparation. Then, as you go through the Seder, try to collect some of those, that's interesting moments. Keep some track of that. And then go through the Seder and again, try to see how things hang together. Try to see those observations. And then after the Seder, I would say a day after Chol HaMoed, make a date with your chavrusa from before, a half an hour on the phone, to kind of do a post-game show on your Seder. And the two of you can kind of share, here's what I noticed. What did you notice? What were your, that's really odd moments? And what did that inspire for you at the Seder? You sort of have a 3-part Seder. A pre-Seder, a Seder itself, and a post-Seder, I think might be some way of attacking that kind of solitary notion. So that's one piece of advice I have. The other piece of advice that comes to mind is that there is a kind of opportunity in being alone. The opportunity is you get a chance to do stuff that you never would do if you had company. And I'm going to give you an example of one such thing. So all these points in which this rabbinic text that the rabbis put together for the Seder quotes biblical text, right? The rabbis using midrash. They're taking biblical text and then they're layering their gloss over it. And one of the fascinating things is to delve into how the biblical text really relates to the drash. Like, what was the pshat? What was the simple meaning? And if you really understand the simple meaning, the larger simple meaning of what's going on, the drash takes on a whole new light. It layers on top of it in a whole new way. And people who want an example of that, just watch our first Parsha video on Shemot, how midrash and pshat sometimes work hand in hand with the story of the daughter of Pharaoh and that fable long extended arm of the daughter of Pharaoh.
Work hand in hand.
Work hand in hand, that's right. So one of the things you can do is stop at strategic points and just open up a Bible, open up a Chumash, and take a look at the actual text that the rabbis were quoting in any page and see its larger context and just meditate for a few minutes on what that larger context means to you. I'll give you a great example of that. One of the biblical texts that the rabbis use is Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hayavotenu V'achshav Kervona Makam Lavadato. In the beginning, our forefathers were idolaters, and then God brought us close, and then we have an extended quote of 2 verses from none other than the book of Joshua. Vayomer Yoshua el kol ha'am. Joshua says to everybody, Ko amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, and he begins to speak. Now, when you're just reading this text without any context, it's just you mumble, stop your way through it. It's just like, okay, fine. So here's this verse. Joshua says, I don't know what I'm talking about Joshua. I don't know what Joshua's really saying. Whatever. There's the rabbis. Let's just move on.
Why are we even reading
Joshua? Why are we talking about Esav? Why are we talking about Har Seir? I don't get what we're talking about. Doesn't mean anything. So stop. Open up a book of Joshua. Try to piece together what is happening. You'll notice that it's chapter 24 in the book of Joshua. You'll notice that the book of Joshua only has 24 chapters. This is the last thing Joshua says in his life. Ponder what that means. This is his valedictory address. This is how he's choosing to go out. This is the last words he's telling people. Put yourself in Joshua's shoes. If you were Joshua, if you were going to say the last words to the people before you died, looking back on your life, what would you say? And then look at what he says. Read the rest of it. This is just 2 verses. This goes on for like 15 verses. It's a fascinating address. I think the rabbis were actually talking about the whole of his address and just quoted a little piece of it. And Joshua's valedictory address could well be Maggid itself. So I think if you do that, and give yourself permission to look at those verses and look at the larger context. You never do it with family around, but it's a wonderful thing to do alone, and then you can debrief with other people afterwards. So, Imu, those are my kind of pontificatings, the 2 pieces of advice that I'd give folks, right? Imu, I'm curious as to your thoughts. If you were talking to somebody who was isolated, right, what do you think they could do to kind of make things a little bit more meaningful?
I think I'd say very similar things to you. I'd say, first of all, make sure that you're in an emotional state to, quote unquote, be productive at your Seder, right? If this doesn't hit for you, if this doesn't resonate for you, it's probably because emotionally there's something you need to honor in you, to let go of, or to celebrate. I don't know. It's up to you. But I would imagine that you should recognize, hey, I'm alone, and that's not fun. But also understand that thousands and thousands of Jews all over the world are also alone, and take great comfort in the fact that we're all doing this together, right? There is a level in which you actually are not alone. This text connects you not only to everyone at present, also doing the exact same thing all around the globe, but there's sort of a pastward sort of connection to people over the ages who have done this for thousands of years, and to the very people who put the Haggadah together and the very people who have went through this experience. That is sort of the point of Seder night. It's to connect you to generations past and to this story that has happened. That could be profoundly meaningful. Yes, in the present level, you are not with your family, and you should be, and you want it to be, but you are with your larger family. You are with your ancestors who have been through this night. And it's up to you to kind of channel that emotional longing into this story. And I think that's an invitation worth taking. I'd also just emphasize everything you said, Rabbi Fohrman. And I'll tell a little story for me, which is that my parents are amazing educators too. And they placed a lot of seriousness on the Seder, and we had to do a lot of prep before we could come to the Seder. But a lot of the prep that we did was, researching commentaries and trading Divrei Torah. And it was amazing, and I learned a lot. But I think one of the best Sedarim, and it's ironic, was actually my first Seder without my parents. My parents took me and my sisters to Israel for a year to celebrate with friends. And my parents are Israeli, and they were going to celebrate, one day in Israel, which is actually what I do nowadays too. When I go to Israel, I only celebrate one day. But back then, I was much frummer than my parents. And it was very important to me and my sisters to celebrate a second day. We were going to celebrate the second day while my parents kind of left, and they went to go hang out with their friends. And we were alone celebrating a Seder for the very first time. I was in 12th grade, and my sisters were 2-3 years younger than me. And I didn't know Rabbi Fohrman back then, but we just had this instinct to read the text of the Haggadah. Just read it and just be like, what is going on here, without any commentaries. We weren't all that interested in trading the commentaries that we may have prepared for. We just read it and asked ourselves, what is this paragraph doing next to the other paragraph? And for the very first time it hit us, like, Avadim Hayinu comes after Manishtana. Avadim Hayinu tells you the entire story. What are we doing with the rest of the Haggadah? Why are we bothering? And there's this little sentence at the end of Avadim Hayinu that says, Kol Hamarbe, anyone who continues to tell and elaborate on the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, they're praiseworthy. And the very next story you get are a bunch of rabbis who I never understood why these rabbis in Bnei Brak in our Haggadah. This is so weird. Well, it's a story of them choosing to elaborate the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so there's an example of some great rabbis who actually did this. And then there's a gloss or a side story about these great rabbis. The Haggadah begins to make sense if you don't force anything, if you're actually relaxed, and if it's not this ritual night where these and these obligations need to happen or else you will fail the Seder. Right? If you just relax, like you were saying, and like Rena was saying, and I think there's something amazing about the fact that we chose to start this podcast about a Seder for kids, because you know what? The Seder for adults, not that different. It's just on a different level. Mm-hmm. If you relax, and remember, this is a night where you're leaning, right? What is that leaning? Again, if you treat it like a ritual, thou shalt lean awkwardly and shove the matzah in while like your elbow is hurting you. You're not getting the point of leaning, right? Like leaning is actually just like, hey, relax, recline. One of the things my parents actually did, which I loved, was we used to have the Seder around the dining room table, and we moved it to the den. My mom draped these white sheets over the couches, and we reclined in our reclining lazy boys, and we'd have the Maggid section there in the den, and it was great, and it was relaxed, and we could actually have a conversation, and nobody could give the wrong answer. There were no wrong answers because it wasn't about answers. It was about
That's such a great idea,
discussion.
By the way, to move Maggid to the den on the couches. That actually is the way it's supposed to be. That's what leaning is. It's not like your pillow awkwardly placed on your chair and your pillow is going to fall on the floor unless you grab it with your other arm while you drink your wine and spill it all over your shirt. Right? That's not what it is. It was actually couches, right, that you're supposed to lean on. And body language is so important, Imu, right? The body language of leaning is relax, you're free to just lounge around here, right? And chat. The Torah is trying to create that coffee shop ambiance with the exposed brick, right? Where you feel like you're listening to some jazz in the corner, and it feels like you just want to hang out and talk. And those rabbis that stayed up all night in Bnei Brak, it's because they were leaning and they were chatting, they were in their coffee house, and they lost themselves in conversation. And so, yeah, that's great. That notion of using the body language for real.
I'll say one more thing to credit, Rivki Stern, who's our audio producer. But she said something really great in a previous podcast where we were talking about Pesach prep. And she said, this is a great year to relax some of the more outward expressions of Pesach, like to relax making the double-decker potato flour Pesach cake. And your sous vide prime rib, but to just chill out on your prep and go basic, and to really emphasize the storytelling aspects of Pesach, to really emphasize the meaningful aspects of Pesach. And when she said it, I was dumbstruck. It was so profound and special because really that's one of the things that causes stress around Jewish holidays is the pressure to nail every single value at 100%. It is just not possible. And when you bring down the temperature and you bring down the focus On some of the other important values, but not as important values, the most important values come into focus. And you and Rena kind of hit that out of the park, right? The most important value is if you have your kids around, you have your family around, it's connecting with your family around the story. And if it's just you, right, then it's pushing yourself to read this text basically on very basic terms. And then what happens next isn't basic at all. What happens next is you really can empathize with a deep story. You can challenge yourself intellectually. You can do things you never thought to do before. And it's really a magical night.
Yep. So I wish everybody out there their own special kind of magic in difficult times. Magic is best in difficult times, right? It offers us an escape. I think coming back to one of the first points, it can be an escape. One of the things which I'm hearing from people as I'm doing webinars and things like that, folks, is that there was a surgeon from Memorial Sloan Kettering who he says all the staff at Memorial Sloan Kettering, all the surgeons and everything, they're all on call now for other hospitals for COVID-19 and to go and just be regular emergency trauma doctors and critical care doctors. He's out there on the front lines, and he just said something which was just knocked my socks off, which is like, I was saying, you're the heroes here. And he was saying, no, what you're offering here is a chance to come home and escape and to come home and lose yourself in Torah for a moment and just forget about everything else, which is so weighty. And with the news being so weighty, being a news junkie can be tough around this time of year. It's tough news. And it's hard to ingest all of that. And I think people can look at the Seder as a chance to have an oasis from that, a chance to just meditate and allow themselves to dive into another world, and for that to be okay, to be enchanted and to be rejuvenated by time spent together doing something else other than reading the news and watching TV. It's a chance for a real kind of magic to happen. Yeah, I wish everyone a magical Yom Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi Fohrman. And thank you for joining me. It's always a really rich experience when you're with me on this podcast. So have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, everybody. Enjoy your Pesach, and thanks for joining us.
Hey folks, Rabbi Fohrman back again. Just want to let you know that, there's still a little bit of time before Pesach. Aleph Beta's got some tremendous resources for you, and they are free. We've decided to actually lower our paywall. That's how we make our money, to try to give what we have to all the folks out there that are impacted in so many different ways by this isolation and quarantine and COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. And so we're trying to be there for you. So don't worry about time limits. You can just log on. There's great videos there. Let your kids watch it. You can watch it. And there's transcripts. So these resources are there, and they're our gift to you at this time. I do want to say, if you'd like to be part of this effort, if you'd like to chip in and claim a piece of what it is that we're doing, we're impacting thousands of kids, thousands of students, teachers, families around the world. If you want a piece of that, the best thing you can do, just subscribe and just join. It's true the subscriptions are free, but you can go to the site, and if you do that, it really means a lot to us. It's $9. It's in what in the old world would have been a trip to Starbucks once a week. In the new world, I don't know what $9 is anymore. But if you can see yourself to being a partner with us, that would be wonderful. So thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful, wonderful Seder. Have yourself a wonderful Pesach, and we'll see you on the other side.